The murder of conservative political leader Charlie Kirk as he spoke at a college campus in Utah marks another dark turn towards political violence in the United States. Charlie Kirk was a 31-year-old father of two and a prominent political movement leader, having formed Turning Point USA, a group of young people that was an ally of Donald Trump and tried to promote the MAGA movement on campus and across the country. So what is Charlie Kirk's legacy, and what effect will his assassination have on American politics and social stability? That's our sad subject for today.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch, our daily podcast on Wall Street Journal opinion. I'm Paul Gigot, and I'm here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. First, the latest on what we know about the shooter. It looks as if he was someone who fired from a rooftop on the Utah Valley University campus, some 200 yards away from where Charlie Kirk was speaking, then ran off. Authorities have say they have retrieved the rifle that they believe the suspect used. The shooter was, they say, of college age and used a high-power bolt-action rifle, which they found they retrieved in a nearby forested area, according to Bo Mason, head of the Utah Department of Public Safety. Kash Patel, the FBI director, had leapt on Twitter Wednesday night to say a suspect was in custody, only to have to say that, in fact, that was not true. That is not a good look for the FBI. Kyle, anything else we've learned so far here?
Not a whole lot. I mean, there's some reporting that they have a footwear imprint and maybe a handprint. There's some suggestion in the news reports this morning that there is some surveillance video of this person. They're trying to use artificial intelligence, facial recognition technology to see what that might turn up. And if it does not turn up any suspects or names, they might release that publicly and ask for tips on it. The Journal also has a story this morning saying this: investigators found ammunition engraved with expressions of transgender and anti-fascist ideology inside the rifle that authorities believed was used in the fatal shooting. That the rifle was found in some woods, I guess, nearby. And so that is notable. The history of these events is that often these are disturbed individuals with varying degrees of mental illness. Sometimes it is hard to pin down an exact political motivation. But if that reporting by the Journal holds up, then it certainly looks like this is a targeted assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Well, the targeted assassination seems clear enough, given the way this shooting took place. Whether or not there was a political motivation, we have to see. But given Kirk's profile, Kim, it would seem that is the likeliest motivation. But let's talk about Charlie Kirk for a second and his what he did and why he was a significant figure in American politics, even at the very young age of 31.
Well, a couple of things, Paul. I mean, the most important is that he sort of grew a movement among young conservatives. This is something that was an area that was sort of left behind in the Republican Party. It's not that no one cared, but he very much dedicated himself to the task of encouraging young people to both engage in civic debate, take part in our political movement, and to do so from a conservative perspective. And that involved the second thing that he became known for, which was going around to universities, engaging in these debates. Often he was speaking to friendly crowds, but all were invited, and he would often get very pointed questions. And he developed this style where he would take all questions. He was very blunt. He never shied away from questions. He didn't try to mollify his audience. This was one of the reasons that he was disliked so profoundly by many on the left, is that he was prone to taking up touchy subjects and speaking very bluntly about them, using words that a lot of the left like to call emotional violence or triggering phrases. And, this definitely put a target on his back. And unfortunately, we know that he had been concerned enough about threats, et cetera. He traveled with his own security team. It's really a sad thing, Paul, because he was all about outreach, all about human engagement and interaction and debate from a civil perspective. So it's sort of horribly, doubly tragic that someone decided to use violence against him, because his argument was always, we need to talk so that we don't engage in political violence.
Kim, how important was Turning Point USA? Is Turning Point USA? Obviously, Trump called on him during the campaign and his organization to mobilize young people for a Get Out the Vote campaign, and not just young people. Turning Point USA was integral to the giant turnout operation in the Trump campaign.
Yeah, it started as a younger Get Out the Vote operation when he began that piece of Turning Point action. But they were so good at it that, yes, as the campaign went on, they expanded and started using some of their strategies and tactics to try to more broadly mobilize people. Turning Point action, I think this is important. You can look at the statistics and the demographics from the last election, Paul, and an unprecedented youth vote, or at least not unprecedented, but a recent modern high of younger voters voting for the Republican Party. And I think that Charlie Kirk was fundamental to this. And you see it too anecdotally and in surveys, the number in particular of young men who have decided to take a look at the Republican Party and have become very engaged in politics. I think a huge amount of that is due to the interaction of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point Action, because they have chapters all across the country and really do step into it can be a hostile environment. I think we have to talk about campus culture. These were not places where they were always invited or welcome, but they insisted that they were going to have a voice, and it made a difference materially in electoral results.
Just to think about the influence there. Okay, so you have kids are just back in school. It's a nice September day at Utah Valley University, a university of about 40,000 or so outside of Salt Lake, not far from Salt Lake, near Brigham Young. Not as well known as Brigham Young nationally, but as the biggest in terms of student bodies in the biggest university in Utah. And 40,000 people. The audience was estimated at about 3,000 people, Kyle. So now that's a pretty big turnout for a speaker on campus.
Right. And one of the worries about this event is that one result of it might be much fewer opportunities for that kind of in-person debate, opportunities to meet somebody across the table who has a differing view and try to argue it out and hash out those things. I mean, this was an outdoor event. The distances in some of these news stories vary. I've seen 200 yards, this rooftop where the shooter allegedly fired from, maybe 150, some of the news stories say. But that is a pretty long distance for somebody who does not have presidential or vice presidential level security. The Secret Service does kind of clearing of rooftops and lines of sight like that when the president is speaking somewhere. The failure to do that in Butler, Pennsylvania, obviously leading to that near assassination of President Trump. But anybody who does not have a Secret Service detail at that level, I think, does not have that kind of protection. And the concern is there going to be a closing off of events like this and debates like this if colleges and speakers are concerned that they don't have the security that they might need?
But I want to get to the consequences here, but I also just want to talk about the Charlie Kirk, what I call it, the political method, Kim, the kind of engagement strategy he had. We think of campuses in America as redoubts of left-wing politics, and they certainly are in the faculty and most of them in the young people in the student body. But there are reserves of huge numbers of young people on campus who are conservative, who don't speak, and who Charlie Kirk did kind of mobilize. And look, I recall it a long time ago, granted, but I recall from my own student days, taking the thrill of seeing the cut and thrust of political debate. And I remember Bill Buckley showing up on campus when I was at Dartmouth, and the turnout was huge. Right? People love the idea of back and forth, cut and thrust.
Yep.
Sharp debate on ideas, and that's what Kirk did. He went to campus. He said, "All right, all comers," and he said, "If you disagree with me, you're first in line." And they'd ask questions, and they'd say, "Don't you think the following?" And he would, rebut them. Now, granted. And then he would post those online, and that enhanced his social media following, of course, as well. Now, one of our colleagues said today in our editorial meeting, he never saw Charlie Kirk lose a debate online, which no doubt he posted, the exchanges that were the most favorable to him. But young people love that sort of debate on campus, even if there are some faction who don't want it. I think the most of them do.
And they hadn't been getting it. And that really gets to the Charlie Kirk phenomenon. One other thing I would just note about Charlie Kirk too, Paul, and I have no idea. I would wager that look, when you're the speaker, by definition, you usually get to win the debate because you decide when it ends. So there's that. But, one thing that was remarkable about Charlie Kirk, and you can watch, there are hundreds and hundreds of these exchanges of him in these campus events, and he didn't get angry. I think that was really important. He was not somebody that yelled or screamed. He was passionate about what he talked about, but he never reacted in the sort of anger that you see is way too common in political discourse these days. But he also debated ideas. And this is also important. If you listen to the interchanges he's not impugning anyone's integrity or their intelligence or, their character. It's saying, look, I think your ideas, the things you believe are wrong. And I know that seems like a small thing, but it's actually really important, not personalizing politics. So that was another aspect of him. But remember, in campuses, you remember those heady days. I had some of it when I was at college too, where we had different speakers. That got shut down for a long time because of cancel culture. And I think you can't give Charlie Kirk a big enough due for setting up these operations on campus, giving conservatives a sort of safe space, as it were, to feel that they could speak out, but then allowing those conservatives to demand that administrations let people like Charlie Kirk come to campus and debate, and other people. It's been enormously important for the growing call for more free speech on campus. And I would argue has fed into some of the changes that we've seen in administrative postures in recent years, also pushed by the demonstrations that they couldn't ignore anymore, Palestinian, the upheavals on campus. But this has played an important role in reopening campuses to intellectual debate.
As you suggested, Kyle, this could have really negative implications for the willingness of people to prominent figures to go on campus and speak in public places, outdoors, but frankly indoors if you can sneak in a gun. Not that I'm aware of that. I'm not aware that everybody on campus who attends a public event has to go through a metal detector, for example. I don't think that's common, at least not yet, but maybe it will become so. Charlie Kirk had his own security team, but the security team can't clear out a perimeter of 200 yards and look at every rooftop and make sure there's nobody up there who has brought a rifle, or in a room in some campus building that he can poke out of a window. And we have this cycle of political violence. I know it's a cliche to bring it up, but it's true, and it seems to be more frequent now. Now, this is not the only such period in American history where we've had this. I remember the 60s, the murder of Bobby Kennedy, the murder of MLK Jr., the attempted murder of George Wallace, and other political and activist figures. And of course, the Weathermen and the violence of the Students for a Democratic Society, left-wing activists. We've had many here in this episode. I mean, Josh Shapiro was firebombed his home, the governor of Pennsylvania, in April. The shooting of Steve Scalise at a baseball practice some years ago. Gabby Giffords. This does seem to be a period in our political and social culture where we're just getting a lot more of these.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I worry about. One is that as a country, we seem to have forgotten about federalism and pushing decisions down to the lowest levels. Instead, everything gets pushed up to Congress and the White House, which means that there's a lot riding on the next election. And politicians know that. So that the political rhetoric gets amped up to 11. Talk about, if the other side wins, they're going to bring back Jim Crow 2.0, or this is going to be the fascist rule coming to America. I think that is deeply unhelpful. And to some extent, some of these political actors seem to think that is just part of the partisan spectacle. But there are listeners who may not be able to discern that, who have disturbances and mental problems, who may take it more seriously than some of these Congress people who are speaking with that kind of dire tone, and then passing bills together the next day. And then two, I worry about the rise of social and new media, that there is stuff circulating that would have had a hard time finding any platform and any audience before the internet, like this rise of remember Luigi Mangione, this guy who shot a healthcare executive, 50 years old, father of two, in the streets of New York, and now in some corners of the internet is being portrayed as a folk hero, a sort of Robin Hood who is taking on insurance denials. I think that is very, very disturbing and corrosive stuff that would have had a hard time finding an audience in the age, and now seems to be just a click away.
Not such a small corner of the internet is Mangione celebrated, and I think when there's going to be an event next week related to his trial, and already one of our colleagues told us who's following this that they're going to be protests in his defense. And treating him as a hero. Kim, we're going to get a debate now, and probably we need to have this debate about political rhetoric and its excesses, and whether or not it contributes to an environment in which people, young people in particular, who aren't totally acculturated, who are maybe disturbed themselves, who can take that rhetoric and begin to justify in their minds assassination of political figures. I want to listen to two clips: Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, in reaction to the killing, and then Donald Trump, his remarks on Wednesday evening.
I'm just going to state the obvious here. This is detestable, what's happened. Political violence has become all too common in American society, and this is not who we are. It violates the core principles of our country, our Judeo-Christian heritage, our civil society, our American way of life, and it must stop. We need every political figure, we need everyone who has a platform to say this loudly and clearly. We can settle disagreements and disputes in a civil manner, and political violence must be called out, and it has to stop.
This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country.
Kim, what do you think of the contrast between those two comments?
Yeah, well, look, I think Mike Johnson is absolutely right. And this has to be, Paul, if we're going to make this stop, it's going to have to start at the top and the behavior at the top. I mean, our editorial page talks a lot about societal and civil guardrails. And those guardrails tend to be set by influential figures. If you are an American and you are watching a political class that debates ideas and treats each other respectfully in the context of political debate, you're going to come away thinking that that is the right way to engage in civil debate. If you watch them screaming at each other, vilifying each other, suggesting that the other side is about to slap the country with tyranny, you will come up with a justification to turn rhetoric into violence, or more easily do so, as you said. So Mike Johnson is right. I think the concern about Donald Trump's words there is it does make it sound as though the administration is now going to go after groups for free speech and for rhetoric that they don't like, and that's exactly feeding into this narrative that people have that government is going to take away their rights and therefore what they do is justified. It's the opposite. We need our leaders not to just be preaching, like saying we don't need more political violence. We all know that. We need them to be acting in a fashion that sets a model for everyone. And my only hope is they haven't done that despite all of these terrible things you've mentioned. You know, we had the slaying too of this Minnesota lawmaker, her husband, right, attempts on Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, this has to start with them. And I hope that what they realize is that at some point, political violence is going to put all of them at risk as well, too. They have a very important stake in getting this right and fixing it.
There is, of course, inevitably when this kind of happens, both sides say, "What's your fault? No, it's your fault. You started it." We had a healthy debate at our meeting today about this, with some people saying, and I think with some justification, that the rhetoric on the political left these days has been particularly vociferous and often unhinged in terms of the fascist and Nazi and threat to democracy and so on, because Donald Trump is in office. And Trump, of course, is a polarizing figure himself and attempts to polarize often along political lines. But we argued in our editorial today that this would be an opportunity for President Trump for leadership. He had a political ally of his, a personal friend, shot and killed. And the anger about that will, I think, resonate in particular on the right, with understandable. I mean, there's a lot of young people out there who will really be angry about this. And they will be looking to think, okay, well, who did it? And maybe thinking revenge. Which would be incredibly dangerous for the country if we get into a condition where 18, 19, 20-year-olds who begin to think they can take revenge against the killers of Charlie Kirk. And if they think that there are factions out there, broad factions, who are responsible for this other than that one killer. The president could say to them, I mean, look, you need not to do that. You're our supporters. We admire Charlie. Charlie didn't do that. Charlie debated. Charlie argued. Charlie tried to win by persuasion and mobilization and political participation. He didn't win with violence. And you shouldn't feel that way, too. What I didn't like about the president's remarks is that they seem to essentially blame one side and say, we will take revenge. And that's not going to help matters if that's the way things go.
I think that's right. I mean, I do think there's a responsibility of Democrats as the party who are out of power and opposing the current administration to tone down their rhetoric. But I agree with you that there's also a special responsibility of the president, first of all, as the president of the United States and as a friend of Kirk's. I think it would be very helpful if he would say the way to honor Charlie is with this kind of debate and disagreement and reasoned discussion about political issues. A phrase that you often hear after horrific events like this is copycat. School shooters, for example, seem to copycat one another, take inspiration from one another. And the worry is that you're going to get the same kind of effect with this kind of political violence, and maybe some effort by some next deranged person to avenge Charlie Kirk or get retribution on the side that that person might think is responsible for it. And so it would be very helpful for the president to try to calm those waters and help the country rise above this awful tragedy and this terrible moment.
And in the same fashion, Kim, it would be helpful, in my view, if you could see a political leader on the left who aspires to be president of the United States actually rise to the occasion, and instead of giving, a 2-sentence response on Twitter, which is fine. I mean, we need that, denouncing the murder of Kirk. Actually giving maybe a thoughtful speech about where we are in our politics, and how we got here, and how if he or she were president of the United States, he or she would do differently and wants to lead differently. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And part of that, Paul, requires people to go back to this point, talking about ideas. I mean, this is part of the problem right now on the left, is that in the absence of an agenda or a proposal for how they want to change things, it's all anti-Trump. It's the entirety of their agenda at the moment is trashing on the president, and often in very personal terms, and very personal terms against Republicans as well, too. So you need to have a leader who's willing to talk about how we got here, talk about the sort of toxicity of some of this, talk about a positive agenda, ways that they want to change things. One other thing, too, Paul, I think I just want to throw this out there. We also have to, I think that the left has done the country no service in cramping the arena for free speech. One of the things that Charlie Kirk often said is we have to have these debates and this human interaction, because it is the alternative to political violence. And one of the problems is that the left over the years has classified so much speech as emotional violence or triggering language, that it's really narrowed that field for how we can have that debate. And we need to, as a country, re-embrace the First Amendment and understand its vast importance as the way we settle things in this country, not through violence.
Interesting point. And paradoxically, by restricting the arena for political debate, or the area of the speech, and if you can't have it on college campuses, where can you have
it,
Kyle? I mean, that's they make it more difficult for really toxic speech, which then kind of emerges in the fever swamps, where you could say, no, that's out of bounds, mm-hmm. and that's unacceptable, because it's harder to draw lines if even debate about transgender politics, for example, is out of bounds, or the kinds of debates that. About climate change. You can't have a climate change debate because you're a denier. Mm-hmm. Then you leave the door open for really toxic brands of speech to be celebrated somehow as justified.
Right. I think that's true. When you narrow the debate that is seen as mainstream and out of bounds, or inbounds, you are pushing more people to consider ideas that are viewed as out of bounds. And once they get out of bounds, it seems like there's no limit to the end. I mean, I do think, thank goodness for the First Amendment, but I do think there's also a distinction between what is legal and First Amendment covered and what is sensible and thoughtful and responsible to say. I mean, the First Amendment also covers narratives in which Luigi Mangione is a hero. My concern is that that stuff is circulating in a way that I think it didn't used to. And if you are the owner of a big social media site, maybe you should think about whether you really want that kind of stuff circulating on your platform, and the civic society that you are contributing by letting that stuff run wild.
Well, we want a robust political debate in this country, and it's going to be raucous. It's going to be mean in some cases because people will go over the line. But when you start to celebrate violence, that crosses the line. And when you begin to justify violence, that crosses the line. And I would argue that when you begin to say, Kim, you're going to give you the last word here, but when you begin to say about your political opponents that if they win an election, that American democracy is going to die, and if your opponents win an election, then the Constitution is going to be a dead letter, you begin to start to justify in the minds of people who aren't entirely stable that, well, they can take violent means into their own hands.
Oh, absolutely, Paul. We have to step away from this. I mean, are there ideas out there that I think are absolutely horrible for the future of the country? Yes, but we need to be talking about those ideas and saying, not predicting catastrophe, not suggesting that the next step is that everyone's going to lose their rights and end up in jail. But rather talking about very substantive policies in the direction of the country, and making the case for why your views are better and more productive. And we've kind of lost that. Part of this too, Paul, and we've talked about this, is we need more people in Congress that are idea makers instead of folks that are just there for their 10 seconds of Twitter, glory and the fundraising. And we need to make ideas cool again, rather than political rhetoric, hot political rhetoric, cool as it unfortunately is right now.
Well put, Kim. We're going to end it there, but before we go, I just want to note that there is a breaking story here. Even as we're meeting here, the FBI has released a picture of the person of interest in the killing of Charlie Kirk. So it's probably only going to be a matter of time before that person is caught, given the tools of law enforcement, and we will know more about the motivation and the identity of this awful political murder. All right, we'll leave it at there. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today on Potomac Watch, our daily political podcast of WSJ Opinion. Thank you for listening.